with Gen Z, there are often a lot of misconceptions. I think the biggest one is that Gen Z shoppers don't go into stores.
Discovery we know is starting online, but we know specifically for Gen Z that they are returning to stores. The reason they're returning to stores is actually for that social connection and kind of like the tactile proof. They want to feel it, they want to touch it, they want to connect with people. 73% of Gen Z visiting a store, physical store, at least once a week. 35% say that they find shopping more appealing when they can virtually try on a product. Suddenly you go, actually, I understand the reality of how we connect the two. How do we bring that kind of Snapchat uniqueness to the kind of changing room in a physical space as well? This idea of the kind of digital space and bridging it with the physical space, I think that is going to become more important. I think where brands will succeed is where they figure out how to connect those in a way that feels seamless.
Hello and welcome to Retail Disrupted, where every week we hear from the leaders and disruptors shaping the future of retail. We're diving into the world of Snapchat on today's show. Snapchat is not just a messaging app. It's where your Gen Z shoppers are spending their time and their money. Snapchat is a discovery engine, a digital dressing room, and a genuinely social shopping experience. So what does this mean for brands? And how should legacy retailers rethink their social strategies? To help us unpack all this, I'm joined by Rachel Levy, Head of Retail and Lifestyle at Snapchat. Rachel, welcome to Retail Disrupted.
Thank you. Hey, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. Social commerce is such a hot topic right now. And I have to admit, I feel like I have a lot to learn about Snapchat. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And maybe that's a good place for us to start. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about Snapchat and how it's different from some of the other platforms out there?
Yeah, for sure. So it's great to be here. I'm Rachel. I lead the retail and lifestyle business here at Snap. So excited to share a little bit with you today. I guess the kind of rise of Snapchat and typically kind of other forms of communication have rewritten how young people are shopping. They're receiving recommendations, they're discovering new brands and products. And so when you look into the heart of what Snap is, it is really a communication platform. It's a messaging tool. It's a discovery channel, and it's social at the heart. And what's really lovely about Snap is that there's different ways that you can interact with it. For those of you that are maybe less familiar with the Snapchat app, there's 5 tabs. It opens to camera. To the left, you've got your kind of maps where you can meet people and connect with them, your friends that you allow. You've got obviously messaging where you can chat, and a lot of the time, sort of 86% of anyone's time is typically spent within the chat. And then to the right, you've obviously got your kind of content, your creators, your discovery. And so it's really an individual place for people to come and kind of build those connections with their friends, with their family, with creators, with their loved ones, etc.
Yeah, and it's really popular among the younger consumers, right? The Gen Z and even Gen Alpha. I know my kids are just slightly too young, but they're already talking about it. They have friends on the platform. So can you just tell us a little bit more about who's actually using the platform? Like, how would you describe the Snapchat audience today?
Yeah, for sure. So Gen Z, absolutely. It is the heart of how they communicate. Young people are looking to engage with authentic and personalized content that makes them feel good, right? And so when you think about the age breakdown, you've got 90% of Gen Z in the UK using it. So out of the 21 million kind of daily users, you've got a really big chunk of an audience there that is kind of living and breathing their life on Snap. And then it's always, I think, important to call out, you've also got kind of 25% over that as well. So you've got the parents kind of paying attention as you spoke to your own kids. You've got a lot of brands kind of leaning into that space. Kind of from like a daily Snapchatter's perspective, you're like 1.3 more times more likely than non-Snapchatters to try new trends. And this speaks really highly to the Gen Z audience as well, because shareability is such a huge factor here. Like when you're sharing products, when you're sharing recommendations, when you're thinking about trying something on in a room or changing room, actually the changing room becomes Snapchat. So there's a little bit of kind of a link between the digital space and the physical space. And Gen Z are really kind of, leaning into that more than maybe any other generation has before, which is mind-blowing to me. I remember bringing my mum along to shop with me, and she would physically stand outside the changing room and double check whether it worked, whether it didn't. And now you're kind of bringing an app into that space. And so you're seeing kind of the new ways that the generation are using it, which is amazing.
It
teaches
is.
me a lot.
Oh, over 90%. I mean, that's phenomenal. Like, you guys know Gen Z better than most retailers do. And I know that you recently released some new research, and I think one of the findings that stuck out for me was that only 5% of Gen Z describe themselves as impulsive shoppers. More of them chose descriptions such as budget conscious and thoughtful and considered as the labels that are better fits to describe their shopping behavior. So I'd love to dive into that research in a little bit more detail, because I think with Gen Z, there are often a lot of misconceptions. Like, I think the biggest one is that Gen Z shoppers don't go into stores, like they're only, digital, only living online. And I think we know that the opposite is actually true. They do want that blend of physical and digital, which you touched on. And I want to come back to that as well. But can you just tell us a little bit more about this and how the Gen Z mindset is different from previous generations?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing to touch on, which is really useful context, is discovery we know is starting online, but we know specifically for Gen Z that they are returning to stores. And the reason they're returning to stores is actually for that social connection and kind of like the tactile proof, right? They want to feel it, they want to touch it, they want to connect with people. So you've got sort of 73% of Gen Z visiting a store, physical store, at least once a week. And when you think about kind of young people kind of describing themselves, or you talked about a couple of the ideas, they actually wouldn't describe themselves as impulsive at all when it comes to shopping specifically. They often describe themselves as kind of thoughtful and considered. And I think there's something really lovely in that, because suddenly you look at, okay, how do we bring immersive experiences to life? How do we think about digital try-on? How's that enabling shoppers to see different shades or different sizes or different colors on their own face or on their own kind of person? And so when you think about kind of 35% say that they find shopping more appealing when they can virtually try on a product, suddenly you go, actually, I understand the reality of how we connect the two. How do we bring that kind of Snapchat uniqueness to the kind of changing room in a physical space as well? So yeah, I think that it introduces this aspect of sensational play. We talk about that a lot in terms of how we bridge this retail experience, how we make it more meaningful, how it maybe feels less transactional, which I think is something that generation is craving more than they have before, this kind of need for social connection or kind of physicality. And yeah, the expectation that brands should offer, I guess, an interactive tech forward journey and improve the way that they enable that product discovery through the platform.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I do feel like a broken record, because on this podcast, I think just about every episode recently, I've been talking about how e-commerce is moving from transactional to immersive to a much more personalized, dynamic experience for shoppers, which is exciting for all demographics. I'd love to just like hone in a little bit on augmented reality and virtual try-ons, because I know I mentioned digital dressing rooms right at the start. And I think it's so interesting how AR is really kind of shaking things up, and as I said, making our online experiences, enhancing our online experiences, and making them more immersive. And as you called out, it's bridging that gap between physical and digital. So, can you just talk us through what this actually looks like? Like, how are your users embracing augmented reality, and what are the opportunities for retailers here?
Yeah. So I guess that from a brand perspective, we start there. They're using AR to bring that physical retail space into the digital space. So they're recreating that store experience, but through immersive AR. And that is very much what we talk about, right? So enabling virtual try-ons, thinking about things like product demos when you're looking at tech, localized offers that kind of connect that discovery digitally, and then kind of direct to foot traffic and in-store conversion. The interesting thing for me is that brands are also now redesigning that journey around moments versus what we saw previously, which is more around the channel. And actually, the most effective brands are those that are focusing on the relevance, the context, the intent, that kind of meeting the consumer right at the experience, whether they're kind of browsing content or walking past a shop or watching live events. And I think there's kind of a couple of examples that I can talk to that really bring this to life, which might be helpful. One of them is Jellycat. I don't know if you're familiar with Jellycat. For those, yeah, you've got kids, so you probably will be. And they have completely redefined retail, in my opinion, by kind of turning shopping into this like whimsical, emotionally rich experience. So whether it's cities like London or New York, I think Paris also, the brand is creating these kind of playful pop-ups that blend nostalgia, particularly for me, kind of theatre and this like sensory delight into kind of one experience. So London, I was there a couple of couple of weekends ago with the kids, and they've got this fish and chip pop up at Selfridges. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it is unbelievable. It's kind of transforming the, I guess, like plush toys into theatre. And you literally go in and they create something as if it's real, and really you're then walking away with a stuffed toy. But the way that they've designed it is to try and bridge that gap between the life on digital and actually the physicality of what it means to connect with something, what it means to kind of touch something. The second example that I'll talk to is kind of Burberry and Highgrove. So I think mid last year, so it was around May, Burberry unveiled its fourth collection with Highgrove Gardens, and they transformed their Regent Street flagship store into this like vibrant, immersive celebration. And that's a very different example, right, to Jellycat. So you've got kind of a plush toy kind of retailer, you've got a really high-end fashion designer, but then actually what we're seeing is, as long as you're building it in an authentic way from the beginning of kind of the planning cycle, it does tend to work across most industries. You've talked already to kind of beauty. We see that a lot. I think we've seen that for quite some time, but it works really well when you're kind of breaking down sometimes I guess especially that generation, like maybe the nervousness of going into store, asking to try something on and feeling a little bit, you're kind of wanting to bring people together, right? But not in a way that makes them question who they are, or are they allowed to be in that space, or is it okay for them to be in that space? Actually, what some of the kind of beauty brands have done is break down some of those silos, that beauty is whatever you want it to be. And actually you have a right to be in that space. So I think beauty is a really great one. I mean, we've all decorated a room in a house, and we've all tried to kind of AR a piece of furniture in there and make sure it kind of does or doesn't fit. And I think it definitely has a place. My mum always teaches me the very old fashioned way of cut out a piece of paper and place it on the floor. But I'd say AR is definitely a much stronger example. And then tech, you obviously see some really cool examples. I mean, recently you would have seen kind of Apple launched its headphones with us in the Bitmoji store. So you can literally, for your Bitmoji, you can purchase the AirPods, you can purchase the AirPods Max, and you can kind of design it as you want to. So I think it has a place in every category. I just think it's making sure that it is right for your business in that moment. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Gen Z specifically is they actually don't mind ads. There seems to be this misconception that they don't want to be advertised to, they're really not interested. But actually, as long as it's authentic and it's relevant and you're showing up in the right way for that moment, but also for your brand, they're pretty welcoming of it. What they don't like is kind of the trickery of pretending it's not an ad, but actually really it's an ad. So there's a bit of kind of work to do, I think, in that space, and making sure you're meeting them where they want to be met. But yeah, it's definitely a seamless way of connecting.
Yeah, it is. It's been really fascinating to kind of watch it develop over the years. And I guess COVID being a little bit of a catalyst for us all when we couldn't get out to the shops, and suddenly, these kinds of technologies were there, and there was a genuine use case, right? Where if, you can't get to the store and you don't know if that, as I said, that sofa is going to fit, then that makes sense. And I just wonder, like, what, I guess it's going to be different for different retailers, but what problems is AR actually solving? So is it a case of, if you get the right product, then you're less likely going to return it? So there's the returns angle, which we know is a huge perennial issue for retailers. But then there's also, I guess, the confidence, as you touched on, to try stuff, with beauty and maybe fashion as well. So I don't know, maybe it's a tricky question, but I just wonder, like, how are you seeing, what's the kind of retailer, how are retailers embracing augmented reality? What are they looking to achieve by using this tech?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think you touched on a couple of them already, which I would very much echo. I think try-on is a really big one. I mean, you've got 35% say they find shopping more appealing when they can virtually try on products. And I think the terminology there is really interesting, because I wouldn't necessarily say people would assume it's more appealing, and they'd maybe say there's more of a likelihood to buy. But actually, when you think of kind of over a third of consumers are using AR, and approximately 3 out of 5 attending a virtual shopping event. So there is a lot more kind of to unpack within that. I think the other piece for me is just this idea of discovery. I mean, when you think about Snapchat's uniqueness, you've got a platform that, yes, opens to camera, yes, has obviously all the filters, has obviously the lenses incorporated within the app, and it's very much a part of who we are. But you also have the messaging. So suddenly you've got a suite of, I guess, products, for example, within the app that allow you to I guess, connect in a different way with different people depending on what makes sense. So if you are tech, if you're retail, if you're a CPG brand, it's kind of your decision as a brand how you want to show up. But actually, it's also the consumer's decision to decide how they want to interact with you. And that could be very much trying something on your living room. It could be deciding what boots you want to wear for an evening event. It could be kind of sharing the latest colors in a various kind of lip shade. And so you can kind of do that across the app, which I do think is a unique way of working, I would say, with our generation, our Gen Zs.
Rachel, I'm going to ask you a really tricky question, so you can tell me if it's too much.
Go on.
I think a lot of retailers will be wondering, how do you measure success here? Like, is there any way to know that if someone has done a virtual try on, have they actually then gone into the store and purchased the product? Can you make that connection between the physical and digital?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's probably the question that everyone wishes they could solve. I'm not sure there's necessarily a silver bullet, but I think the way that we're handling it very much with our brands and the clients that we work with is identifying very early on in the conversation, what is it we're trying to achieve, right? Because there's a lot of campaigns that happen. There's a lot of noise in the industry, and our role is to figure out at what moment can we impact that, and at what moment can we make a difference for the brand and allow them to connect with the consumers. So one of the things that we're talking about a lot is, what is the metric of success for that specific campaign? Is it that you want to drive views? Is it that you want to increase your kind of brand lift study awareness metrics? Is it that you're driving kind of traffic to site? And that's really a key proxy to success. The other thing that we're doing, which is really interesting at the moment, is I talked a little bit earlier about the very left side of the app, which is the map. And you may have seen recently, brands can now show up on the map. It's called Promoted Places. There's something really lovely about that kind of connection. Again, that kind of digital to physical space. And so it's trying to connect the kind of physical presence. So if you're Boots, for example, at Christmas and you see the bauble on the shop and you're exploring where your friends are, and actually it drives you into store, and there's maybe localized offers. There's something really clever people do from like a geo perspective. Maybe there's certain launches happening in different places. And again, you can talk to kind of that kind of physical retail space within the digital space as well. I think the other thing that I've seen that's really been quite successful is particularly in CPG, when they direct to like a sample. So for example, you are on the app, you kind of see the ad show up, and actually their version of success is how many people are requesting the sample. So maybe it's a new lipstick, maybe it's something different. So there are different ways that people are getting kind of quite clever about it. And for us, it's trying to articulate at the very beginning, what is success to you, and how do we make sure that we show up as kind of Snap and we deliver that?
Yeah, that's that it's really interesting, and I think I actually wasn't expecting you to answer that question, so I appreciate, and I think our listeners and viewers will really appreciate that, because it's a lot to get your head around, because social commerce has gone from being really an experiment for a lot of retailers to now it's a core retail channel and they can't ignore it. And so I think I'm certainly hearing from a lot of retailers that there is this need. I think it's challenging because there is so much channel complexity. It's not just social commerce, but we also have agentic commerce. We have pre-loved and resale, and that we have new Chinese disruptors coming in and changing the game. So there's all these different platforms and channels and almost dimensions for retailers to embrace. And I think it's a lot to get your head around. So I guess my next question to you then would be, for a retailer that is trying to manage all of this complexity, how should they get started?
I think at its simplest form, just downloading the app and actually exploring it yourself. Whenever I go into meetings, my first question is, who actually has the app? And then actually you'd be surprised who's using it, who's not, how they're using it. And I think the kind of opening the door to actually understanding the platform as an individual makes you much kind of better equipped, or much more well equipped, I should say, to actually then figure out how to connect with the consumer. I think that if you're kind of not going to do that, and that's fine, then my view would always be speak to someone that is, kind of listen to podcasts, kind of dial into webinars, or listen to kind of various shows and just educate yourself around that platform, and speak to Gen Z. I mean, I keep saying, like, just hire Gen Z and they will teach you how to do everything. But yeah, there's definitely a bunch of different ways to kind of engage with us. I mean, obviously reach out to me or kind of join us at some of the upcoming events, but there's definitely a role for Snap. It's really kind of the heart of kind of Gen Z that we're seeing at the moment. There's so much kind of connection to be driven. I think the discovery piece for me is kind of the most interesting. I spend a lot of time looking into that, and I think there's some really interesting stuff coming down the road.
It's a very different experience to traditional e-commerce. So I wonder if you could help us unpack that in a little bit more detail. And I know you touched on discovery. So how does the mindset of a Snap user differ from a traditional e-commerce shopper?
I think the kind of key piece for me is this idea of like the loop and the funnel of Snap. So if you think about it from kind of, you begin from a discovery perspective, there is obviously a conversation around awareness, but then there's this piece around kind of social sharing, let's say. And really, Snapchat's different tabs fulfill all stages of that purchase journey, right? So if you've got 97% of Snapchatters visiting multiple tabs in a single session, suddenly you go, actually, as a brand, I need to show up across the app. This isn't just I'm going to pick one tab and I'm going to kind of double down on that. Really, the conversation that we're having when we think about best practices, there is value in being visible across the platform, and very much working with the team to identify what is the kind of best performing formats for you, for your specific brand, for that specific moment. We talked a lot earlier about how we measure success. This is a big part of how we then make sure that success is achieved. And so identifying, I mean, we just launched just in the last year, this kind of ads in chat. So sponsored snaps, you may have seen it. And that really has changed the playing field from being kind of a very kind of lens heavy or kind of maps heavy or kind of discovery through kind of creators heavy space to actually, when you think about the 86% of time spent in chat, and now you're opening that up for a brand to authentically be involved in, suddenly you found kind of the most I guess the most kind of privileged part of the app. And actually you can now show up and be that friend. The brands can become the friends, and there's a little bit of an interchanging between that. So I think we're really trying to be the right thing at the right moment. And I think what kind of Snap does is it offers you the ability to make that decision, and also make that decision as a consumer. What you do and don't lean into is very much in your gift. We can't force you down a rabbit hole as much as I'm sure we would love to as retailers. But really what we can do is make sure that we elevate the discovery opportunity, and we kind of make sure that you are showing up in the right places, and that we are driving the awareness that obviously every retailer's desire, but also we're kind of enabling that social sharing. I think the ability to kind of share ads or share lenses or share playfulness within the chat is really actually what makes Snap so unique. And when you kind of think about the AR piece we talked about earlier, a lot of that is living within Snap, right? And so my kind of message earlier of go and speak to people, see how other people are doing it, and not always in the industry that you're in. I think sometimes the most valuable is actually learning from industries adjacent to retail. For example, you spoke a lot about beauty. I always think tech's a really interesting space. So I think there's a lot of clever ideas for us for sure.
Yeah. And as a final question, I always love to get my guests' view on the future and, how shopping might evolve in the next 3 to 5 years. And I won't go any further than that, because I think the pace of change with technology now is just so incredible that nobody really knows what it might be like in 10 years. And also I think it can be hard to separate the hype from reality. And there's so much happening when it comes to AI. We talked a lot about AR today. Will the concept of a website even matter to younger consumers in the future? I just wonder, like, what are your views? How do you see e-commerce evolving as we look ahead to the next few years?
I mean, I think that's the question, right? If anyone had a crystal ball, now would be the time to look at it. I'd say from my perspective, it's less what will and won't exist. And I think it's more what will and won't be used. And I think where Snap has a really interesting position is it's growing. We're kind of nearing a billion. That's our kind of target for this year in terms of users, and we're really focused on making sure that the app delivers what it needs to for our consumers, but also meets the kind of requirements of a brand wanting to show up in a way that is authentic and is right and is influential and inspirational. So I would say that we will continue to see probably like this doubling down of this idea of bridging the gap, this kind of talk about it a lot, but I think it's really important. This idea of the kind of digital space and bridging it with the physical space. I think that is going to become more important. I think where brands will succeed is where they figure out how to connect those in a way that feels seamless. So you sort of look at a holistic campaign and you recognize that it is of the same ilk, should I say. I think there is always going to be value in this idea of a website, certainly in the next kind of 1 to 2 years. Maybe if you were looking sort of 10, 15 years out, I'm definitely by no means a retail analyst, but I would say that the value is still there, right? Like brands still need the transaction piece of it. And yes, you're going to go to store, and yes, we want people to kind of meet and kind of drive connection and discover in store and kind of have the ability to kind of touch and feel things. But people also still want convenience. So I think it's about balancing the two and putting your kind of dollars as a brand where it makes sense for you. Sometimes that won't be what other players are doing, and that's okay if it works for you. I think it's defining where you're trying to get to kind of in that 1 to 2 year space, and then being mindful of what it is you can be using, whether it's kind of AI, whether it's AR, whether it's, you talked a lot about agentic. So yeah, I think it's a watch this space, but it's kind of great to be a part of a company that enables that. And I think Snap is really the kind of everyday inspiration.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that despite all the changes that we're seeing, I think the fundamentals of retail haven't changed. To your point, people still want convenience, they still want connection, they still want value and good service. And it's just that technology is enabling this and really kind of supercharging our expectations. So super interesting. Rachel, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Awesome to be here.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.